Hey y'all, it's Helen Castillo here with moodfabrics.com, and today we're going to be talking about how to hem lace. I've got 3 different types of laces here: a guipure, a stretch lace, which is always really nice, and we've got this re-embroidered mesh lace as well. So there are a few ways that you can hem lace depending on the look, the expense, or depending also on what type of garment you're creating. So the nice thing about stretch laces, like this all over lace, which means that the print is all over, the beauty of it is you can really just turn it up and do a top stitch in the same color thread to match the fabric, and then there you go. I can't recall which designer just did a full-on jumpsuit that was this kind of marigold yellow lace, but it was like a bodysuit with long sleeves, long pants, and all they did was they didn't even use a lining. So what you could do is you could always back this with a power mesh in like a nude color so that you create that illusion of having the flesh or the skin tone underneath. Another way you could hem this type of stretch lace is you can always cut into the applique and kind of make that a type of edging, which I'll show you with the guipure. And yeah, so stretch lace is really nice. It's a little bit less expensive, and you get that stretch quality in both directions. So you can use that for tops, bodysuits, skirts. You could use this for gowns too, for maybe like spring, summer season. With the guipure, the nicest part about this is it's so airy and it's so expensive looking. And I love that along the selvage edge here, which we'd consider the selvage, it's either end of the roll when you're pulling the yardage off the roll, that you've got the motif already clean finished, traditionally on either side of the lace. So we've got it clean finished on this end and clean finished on the other. So the nice thing is, again, this is kind of that all over repeat of lace that you can use it in either direction. Just be sure that when you are cutting your garment that the flowers are pointed upwards, because if you cut the garment upside down, you're gonna have your florals pointed down and it's just, you know, kind of looks funny. So choose like the majority of those florals or that motif, and if they are pointed upwards, you're good to go. Just bear in mind that some laces have a center of reflection, which means that either side could be in opposite directions. So as for hemming a guipure lace, I would just leave it as is. I would use maybe like a contrast lining. I have this silk dupioni, which could make for a really nice pop. I would actually hem the layer of the lining with just clean finishing and turning up that hem. And then you can leave the lace edging to hang a hair longer than the hem of the lining. And you get this nice transition that looks very organic from your lining to your lace. So I'm actually teaching this class in January for the elderberry dress. And this is a perfect example of how you can combine a contrasting lining with a contrast lace overlay. As for this re-embroidered mesh, it's got a mesh backing. You can see here that it's got this very fine kind of netting foundation. The beauty of it is that with all laces, I wouldn't say for the all over stretch lace, but in the instance where you have a re-embroidered mesh lace, you can cut out these motifs as applique. That means you can remove them from the fabric and you can reapply them onto different fabric, or even do kind of like a collaging to create areas that can be more modest on the garment. As for the scalloped edge, you can see here along the bottom, or what is the selvage. So we've got the scallop on one end, and on the opposite, which is really beautiful, you don't have the scallop. So in the instance of this particular style of lace, you could even drape this going from top to bottom and utilize that scalloped edge as your hem. And when you're cutting any type of lace, you want to be sure that you're leaving about 1/8 of an inch worth of distance from a scallop or any type of motif that you're using as an applique, so that the threads do not unravel. So you just kind of trim close as possible. I just use the very, very edge of my scissor. These are my sharpest scissors, although you can use nippers as well. And the nippers will actually give you a lot of control when you're cutting this close to your embroidery. Got these really cutie Ginger nippers, great stocking stuffer, just saying. And this gives you that perfect, really, really close, really controlled precision. And then you've got just a hair's worth of the mesh. You can cut a little closer, and when you do that, you'll want to use what's called fray check. Fray check helps to keep the fabric from continuously fraying. So if you decided, and the beauty of it is it's a very diluted kind of like glue mixture that dries in about 20 minutes, you can clip much closer when using the fray check. And after you've cut very, very closely to the lace, you take the fray check and you just want to graze the edges there, and that will create a seal on that fabric. And this will not melt, it will not damage your fabric. It's actually going to end up dry and clear, and it's going to give it kind of like a crispy edge that's very, very discreet, and it will keep your fabric from continuously fraying or unraveling. And this is a really great tool to use when you're doing beading, or if you are cutting into lace and you want to leave like a raw edge so that the threads from the embroidery or the lace itself doesn't unravel. Let's say I didn't want to use the scallop and I just wanted to cut straight across and turn up that hem. What I would do first is I'll take the bias tape, and this is double fold 1/2 inch wide bias tape. I'm using a contrast color so you can see the difference. And we'll use the opposite ends of this lace before we jump into appliquing. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna slice straight across that bottom edge so that I can turn up that hem. So I wanna be sure that I have a clean finish on this edge first. So I'm gonna sandwich this bias tape along the hem edge, and you want to be sure that you get the raw edge of your lace sandwiched into the center of the bias tape. You use your wonder clips, clip that bias tape into place. And then we'll run to the machine, and with 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to do a top stitch closest to the open edge of my bias tape. Bias tape is your BFF when you are designing evening wear. You can buy it, or you can make it out of silk or cotton. So Clover makes this amazing tool, and I've used it countless times before. And this is actually which will create the 1/2 inch double folded bias tape. And what you do is you cut strips of bias. That means you cut on a 45-degree angle out of most fabrics. It's usually better to do with a woven. And then you feed that through the top end here, the wider part, and it automatically folds it twice, and you just pull that out along your ironing board and press, and it gives you exactly this. You make custom bias tape, and then you can use that for the hem edge of your lace piece. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna run to the machine, and I'm gonna do a top stitch 1/8 of an inch closest to that open edge of my bias tape. So using my lovely Mood branded sewing machine, I'm gonna be sure that I have the correct presser foot on there. And you always wanna use thread to match your bias tape because you want your stitches to become camouflaged in the bias tape. All right, so I'm going to use the straight stitch setting on the machine right now. You can always baste by hand. That means you do stitching by hand to join two pieces of fabric, and then you remove the stitching later on after you've sewn by machine. So I'm gonna do 1/8 of an inch with my regular presser foot from this edge. So now that I have my bias tape on the hem edge, I can either leave it like that, which would kind of give you a really like Dolce & Gabbana finish, having that contrast with the bias, or you can turn up your hem, press this flat, and then you can do a stitch with the invisible thread, which I'm going to demonstrate now. So now that I've got my bias tape, you can see this is the right side of the lace, the wrong side with the darker threads from the bobbin. I'm just gonna turn this hem up and I will pin that into place. You should use silk pins for pinning your lace. Always use silk pins. They're these more fine, flat-headed pins. And remember, whenever you use invisible thread, you shouldn't use heat over top of it because it can melt. So just bear in mind, you can use very light steam. Just be sure you use a pressing cloth. I usually use a scrap piece of muslin. All right, once you've knotted your invisible thread, I'm gonna do a quick hem by just picking up the self fabric, picking up the bias tape, and invisible hem it up. Just pick up a fiber from each and move forward. You can always do this hem by machine. Just be sure you use a sample first to test the tension and stitch length so that it looks nice and flat and doesn't end up pulling or breaking your lace. Then when I get to the tail end, I'll just create a knot here. Make sure you haven't pulled your stitches too tightly. And then I will just lock my thread in place by doing a few loops at that end location. Then I can take a dab of the fray check, put that right over top. If your invisible thread is being finicky, you can just make a proper knot with the sewing needle.